Alrighty, continue. All right, good morning. My name is Dr. James Christ. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and a certified substance abuse counselor. I'm also the clinical director at the Child and Family Counseling Center in Woodbridge. And I'm here to talk with you today on Effective Parenting Strategies 2021. I've been doing this talk for a while, but I recently rebranded it. I used to say it was a Effective Discipline Strategies talk, but I feel like that's sort of missing the point because it's not just about discipline, because some people associate that with punishment. And really, I use discipline to think about teaching methods, and I'll explain that kind of as we go along. So how many of you struggle with screen time? I know this is a particularly difficult time with the pandemic. A lot of kids have had much more time on screens. It's been a lifesaver for some. It certainly makes it very hard when it comes time to transitioning back to in-person learning. Some of you may find it's easier to do chores yourself. I hear this as well, that if you have to get on your kids 5 or 6 times to get them to do their chores, it's like, why even bother? Just do it yourself. But that's not a good choice, as we'll see. Sometimes it seems like kids may care more about or that you care more about grades than your child. And that's a problem as well, for reasons we'll talk about. Feeling confused with conflicting parenting advice. There's a lot of different methods out there, spare the rod, spoil the child, positive discipline, self-esteem. And it's very confusing for a lot of parents. And you don't really know, well, which of these is going to work for my child. Feeling powerless when your child defies you. There are kids who will say, hey, you can't do this. I'm going to tell the authorities, or I'm going to report you to Child Protective Services, or when they're in therapy with me, they'll say, well, I'm going to tell Dr. Christ on you. And sometimes it's very difficult to figure out, what do you do if your child defies you? Spanking them for defiance doesn't really help. Feeling guilty about not being a good enough parent. A lot of parents feel like they don't have the time. I mean, it's such a busy time. It seems like everybody is always busy constantly. And so if you're not always there for your kids, or you're trying to balance monitoring your kids and doing your work, it's common to feel guilty. If you are in a blended family, or if you're divorced from your child's other parent and you feel like they're losing out, sometimes you feel guilty about that, and some parents will overindulge as a result of that, and that doesn't really help either. So, but there is hope with all of this. Parenting is a tough business. It's not for the faint of heart. Obviously kids don't come with instruction manuals. Today's challenges do make parenting harder. Pandemic, video games, social media, there's so many other influences that you feel like you don't have a lot of control over. And again, the decision making as to how much is okay, how much is too much. Fortunately, we have research on what works. That's one of the things that psychologists do, is we do research and testing different methods and seeing the things that make things worse versus better. Raising kids is frustrating at times as well as rewarding. I would say it's one of the most rewarding things you'll ever do, but it's also one of the most frustrating things. You're only human, you're gonna make mistakes, and I think this is really important. And apologies and forgiveness are essential. You're not gonna be perfect, and you can't expect your kids to be perfect. So don't hesitate to apologize if you messed up, because you want your child to be able to do the same thing with you. You're gonna lose your temper. That is common, but how you do that and what you do with that information, or with that experience, is gonna make a big difference in how your children react and how they grow up, and how they feel about themselves and how they feel about you. So let me give you an overview of the talk. I know this is a number of different things. It seems like a lot. And it clearly is, but I'm going to talk about each of them, and hopefully it'll make some sense as we go through them. And what I'd like you to do is come away with some new skills, with some new ways of thinking about parenting kids that I hope will make it easier. Because I find with parents is that once you adopt these techniques, parenting becomes easier because you kind of know what you're doing. And when you see it working, you can sort of calm down a little bit. So let me talk about the overview here. We'll talk about the definition of discipline. We're going to talk about some of the causes of misbehavior, why kids, misbehave. Are they trying to get your attention? Are they just bad kids? Which, of course, I don't believe that. Disorders complicate things. If you have kids, and most of the people that are listening to the talk today have kids with some sort of mental health diagnosis, autism, ADHD, oppositional defiant disorder, bipolar disorder, things like that. Those things make discipline more challenging. We'll talk a lot about love and logic parenting. It's one of, I think, the most effective methods of parenting. And it gives you, again, a mindset as to how to think about kids and the problems that they have, and helping them resolve those problems using effective problem-solving skills. We're going to talk about punishment and why punishment is considered the least effective form of discipline. We'll talk a little bit about teenager challenges, because once they become teenagers, obviously you have less control over what they do, where they are, and when that happens, you want them to be able to make good decisions even when they're not around you. We'll talk about spanking and why spanking is not a recommended form of discipline. We'll talk about modeling respect. I believe that if you model respect in how you deal with your kids, that sets them up for being able to show respect to you as well. I think some of you will have a little bit of an issue with that, but hopefully when we get to the end of the talk, you'll understand where I'm coming from. So timeout, I'm sorry, back up. Using incentive systems. For some kids, especially if they have disorders such as ADHD, incentives really make a big difference. What you're doing is you are compensating for the lack of motivation that these kids often have. And incentive systems obviously is how we all function in society. If we didn't get paid for our jobs, we probably wouldn't go, even if we love our jobs. We'll talk about timeout. Is this a punishment or more of a coping strategy? And finally, I'll give you some additional parenting tools, just sort of a list of different things that you can use given the situation that I think you'll find will be very helpful. All right, let's start with discipline. Okay, discipline means to teach. Think of the word disciple. A disciple is a student. So if you think of your kids as students learning to navigate life, you'll be much better equipped to teach them the skills that they need as they go on. For example, if they're having trouble managing their emotions, rather than just shutting them down, you want to teach them ways of regulating themselves. It's not going to be perfect. But each opportunity is a teaching opportunity. That if you look at it as simply a misbehavior and imposing a consequence, as opposed to say, I can see you're really upset, what are some ways what are some ways you can calm yourself down, for example? So there's a book called Parenting Breakthrough. And the one thing I remember about reading this book many years ago is that the author says that the basis of your parenting authority changes over time from telling kids what to do to selling them on the right thing to do. And the way in which you do that is through your relationship. So again, teenagers are going to be, you can't monitor them nearly as closely. So if you work with them and help them understand why making certain decisions is so important, they're more likely to think about that when they're tempted with drugs, alcohol, vaping, whatever challenges may be out there, and temptations for teenagers. Okay, so parenting is not a popularity contest. So you want to have a positive relationship with your child, but it's not about just being liked by your child. If you have that attitude, it's going to be harder for you to impose consequences when needed. What you want to do is, again, keep your relationship preserved at the same time you are giving them a consequence. Love and Logic Parenting talks about locking in your love before informing kids what the consequences of their decisions will be. Okay. All right. So let me talk a little about brain-based parenting. You'll say, if you do an internet search, you'll see all sorts of information on brain-based parenting. And the idea behind that is that we understand how the brain matures. And if you keep that in mind when you are parenting, you are not going to overreact to situations. You will understand why your kids are reacting the way that they are. So here's 5 different strategies to think about. Being sensitive and emotionally responsive to your child's need for attention. Okay. So if your child, for example, is acting out and maybe you haven't been able to get them as much attention as you wanted that day, if you are sensitive and you recognize what might be behind the behavior, it'll be easier to intervene because kids obviously need parental attention. Parents should be their kids' safety net, that if they're feeling overwhelmed, that they come to you, which comes to the second issue here, or second item. Confronting children effectively and consistently when they're stressed out. Again, instead of using a consequence, if you see them being stressed, to be able to say, hey, do you need a hug? I see that you're pretty overwhelmed. What's going on? Would you like some help in solving that problem? When you comfort kids when they're stressed out, they then relax. And when they relax, because you understand their emotions and where they're coming from, they can calm down and they're more likely to listen and to be able to accept your assistance. And that's a really important thing. When you resolve those sorts of things, that's actually what keeps attachment strong between parent and child, when they know they can come to you. Being a first companion as children are learning to enjoy and stay connected with others. And one of the things that is look at it as sort of a social skills training. That if you're playing with your kids and they're having some issues, maybe they're not playing fairly, use that as a teaching opportunity. You say, hey, when you cheat on the test, I feel, or when I cheat on this game we're playing, I feel kind of sad. I feel like, you're not making it fair for me. And you help them work through that as opposed to don't cheat on tests on games. Nobody's going to want to play with you if you cheat. That doesn't really teach them anything. Knowing when to let kids struggle and work through challenges to build their own resilience. One thing to think about, if you see your child struggling, whether it's homework or cleaning or whatever it might be, even a situation where they're interacting with a sibling, maybe getting into an argument, to be able to say, hey, I see that you're really upset here. This math problem is really hard. Do you need a little bit of help, or do you feel like you can manage it on your own? And so that way you give them the opportunity uh, to do it. So you only want to give as much help as needed to get over the hump. For example, if they're building something and they're getting frustrated and you say, well, let me take over and you do it all for them, they don't learn. Instead, you say, okay, well, I think if you try this one here, that might work a little bit better. Oh, and they say, okay, cool. And they continue. So again, you provide the minimum level of help needed for them to continue to struggle and work through it. Because when they figure it out on their own, they can own the success. They're going to feel better about themselves. And that, again, builds resilience. Protecting kids from the dysregulating effects of our own negative emotions by using our powers of self-regulation and stress management, being the adult in the room. This bears repeating here. So the idea behind this, if you have a child who's acting up or acting out, and you become dysregulated because you are so frustrated, maybe you've told them 10 times to get ready for school or to clean their rooms and they haven't done it, and you're tempted to just go off on them. That can be very destructive to kids because if you're out of control, screaming and yelling, what does that say to them? It doesn't feel like a safe situation. Also, you have to be careful if that happens and you're out of control. Some kids will take advantage of that because they figure, okay, I got mom's attention. I really made her yell and scream this time. So again, being the adult in the room means that as much as possible, try to regulate yourself. If you are too angry with your child for something, it's perfectly okay to say, I'm too mad to talk to you about this right now. Let me come back in about an hour. I'm going to calm down and you and I can talk about this some more. It's also a great relationship strategy, by the way. All right. So number 2, causes of misbehavior. So one of the things you want to do when you're trying to figure out how to respond to your child's behavior is be curious, be an investigator, to ask yourself, why is your child behaving this way? If it's out of attention, if it's out of fatigue, if it's out of anxiety, there may be many reasons why your child is behaving a certain way. For example, if your child is always starting fights with his sister, there may be a reason behind it. It may be that he feels that it's not fair or she always gets her way. It doesn't mean that that view is accurate, but whatever their view is, that drives their behavior. You want to choose a response that is helpful rather than hurtful. Again, if a child is misbehaving, there's already something wrong. So if you, for example, see a child misbehaving or just getting agitated and you say, hey, listen, you're getting, I can see how upset you are. Do you need a little time to calm down? Okay. Would you be willing to just, go in the other room for a little bit, chill out, maybe go for a walk around the house and then come back and we'll talk about it? That's far better than thinking you have to impose a certain consequence each and every time they misbehave. Keep in mind that your child's age and temperament. For example, if you take a 2-year-old to the store at the end of the day to go shopping and he or she is already very tired, you're tired, that's a recipe for disaster, okay? So sometimes when you see what seems like misbehavior in a child is simply that they're overwhelmed. They're not capable of regulating themselves at that moment in that situation. So when you do that, when you recognize that, you're going to choose a different response. If at all possible, for example, you might try to avoid that time. You say, this is not a good idea. If I try to do this at this time, I'm going to have a negative reaction. Breaking the code of misbehavior goes along with the being curious. So once you break the code and you understand what the misbehavior is conveying, then you can address it more directly. For example, if your child is misbehaving and you think that part of that is because they didn't get enough attention from you or they're feeling stressed out or lonely or whatever it might be, you can say, hey, you seem pretty stressed out and pretty angry. Are you feeling like maybe I haven't really spent enough time with you today? Are you upset about that? And sometimes kids, if you give them that possibility to say, well, yeah, you've been on the phone all day, or you've been at work, or whatever it might be, or you give more attention to my little sister than you do to me. Uh, Once you understand that, then you can also give them some ways of handling it better in the future. For example, you can say, hey, if you ever feel like I'm not paying enough attention to you, just come up to me and say, hey, Daddy, I need some attention. I miss playing with you. If they can say it that way, then again, it's going to be much more likely that they're going to get what they want in a positive way. Avoiding the temptation to respond in anger, watching your tone. Even if you're saying the right things, when you're raising your tone, it stresses kids out for the most part. One of the things I hear all the time from parents is that, my kid thinks I'm yelling. That's not yelling at all. I'll show them yelling. But the tone that you just heard in my voice raising a little bit, often that's how kids interpret yelling. It's raising their tone where they realize that you are starting to get upset. So keep your tone low as much as possible, because that will also allow your child to listen better to what you have to say. Redirect by talking calmly. It goes right along with that. To be able to say, hey, I know that you're really upset about this, but I can't really listen to you. We can't talk it out if you're going to raise your voice. If you can bring your voice down a little bit and stay calmer, then we can talk about it. And if they are not able to do that, give them time to calm down. And that a child or parent can request a timeout. And a timeout not as a punishment, a timeout to calm down and regroup. And once you calm yourself down, then it's easier to talk. And this is especially important with teenagers. And teenagers can be pretty out there in terms of some of the things that they say. But screaming, yelling matches with your teenager is never going to work out well. 3 tools: closely supervise, distract, and redirect. So let me talk about that briefly. This often works well for the younger kids, that if you supervise them closely, you're more likely to catch a misbehavior before it happens. If you see them getting wound up, you can redirect them, for example. So supervising closely is a preventative method. Distraction, if you see them starting to do something that is not okay, if you can just gently distract them to something that's more acceptable, you can avoid the problem as well. Redirecting, if you see that a child's doing something wrong, for example, throwing something in the house, or writing on the walls, whatever it might be, to redirect them to a safer way to express it. Even something like screaming and yelling. If your child wants to yell, say, hey, yelling at the top of your lungs hurts my ears, but if you want to yell into a pillow and scream as loud as you want so that nobody can hear it, that would be okay. So that's a redirection, so that you are teaching them a skill, as opposed to just, again, thinking that you have to punish them for misbehaving. Let kids experience the natural consequences of their behavior. Let me explain this a little further. Natural consequences are something that occurs naturally as a result of your child's decisions. If your child forgets to do her homework, the natural consequence is she's going to go to school and get a bad grade. Same if she doesn't study for a test. If she doesn't put her things away, she's going to suffer the consequence of not being able to find them when she needs to. So now, natural consequences are a really good teacher, because if they realize, hey, this happened because of my decisions, then you can work with them on, okay, how can you make a different decision in the future? If you keep forgetting your homework, hey, what's one thing that you can do to make sure that you don't forget it tomorrow? And asking that question, not just telling them what to do, but asking them. And they say, well, maybe if I put my homework in my backpack before I went to bed, that would work. And say, hey, that sounds great. How about trying that, and let's see how it works in the morning. That way, again, they're taking ownership of the decision, of the strategy that they're using, and then they can own the success as well. Okay. The other advantage of letting kids experience natural consequences, and this is also a love and logic item, and we'll come back to that method in just a minute again. The child's bad decision becomes the problem, not the child. Okay. This allows you as a parent to sympathize with your child, to be able to say, oh, wow, you forgot all of this at school, and now you don't have any way to do your homework. I can understand how you might be upset about that. So what are some things you can do to deal with this? What are some ways you could solve the problem? Again, this allows you to sympathize with them, as opposed to just say, see what happened? Give you another example. Say your child leaves some property out on the lawn and forgets to put the bike away, for example. And the next morning comes out and realizes the bike is stolen. Instead of you yelling at your child for it, and you see your child being upset, you can say, wow, what happened? Oh my gosh, somebody stole your bike. How did that happen? oh, I left it out in the yard. Instead of saying, you should have known better, you can say, I can understand how you'd be really upset about that. Sometimes people forget, so how can you handle this? What do you want to do about it? Well, I need another bike. And you can say, well, I bought you the first bike, and you decided not to bring it in. So I paid for the first bike. You can pay for any bikes after that. So what are some ways you can earn some money so that you can replace your bike? A much more positive way of expressing this. But again, putting the responsibility back on the child, not shaming them, being understanding, but also recognizing that it's up to them to figure out how to deal with the problem at that point. All right. And also with this, to be able to say, what did you learn from this experience? Okay, well, I'm going to always bring my bike in and say, well, that's a good lesson. So maybe that's the good thing. If you remember this the next time for your bike or anything else, you can avoid yourself a lot of heartache. All right. Disorders complicate things. So I'm going to go through a few different disorders because a lot of times, I think sometimes parents are afraid to go into counseling because they're afraid they're going to be blamed for being a bad parent for how their child is responding. And that's really not fair. I don't think that it's bad parenting, especially when you have disorders going on. The good parenting may work well with most kids, but if you have a child with some of these other issues, it's going to be harder for them to regulate themselves, which means they're more likely to misbehave. Okay. So when that happens, the way to think about it is when you have kids with disorders, specialized parenting techniques are needed. Maybe not the ones that you would normally use with your other kids, but if you have this going on, you'll be able to make a better decision because you'll take into account those disorders. And that doesn't mean it's an excuse. Some parents will say, well, my child uses ADHD as an excuse. Well, it's not an excuse. It's an explanation. It explains why things are harder for that child, but it's not an excuse. So you can say, hey, that does make it harder. So that's one of the reasons I've suggested that you come up with some ways to remember things so that the ADHD doesn't cause so many problems. Okay, parental disorders also complicate things. If you have ADHD, for example, it's going to be harder for you to react calmly because the impulsivity that goes along with ADHD often leads to overreactions. If you're inattentive, you might impose a consequence, maybe a punishment. They're grounded for a week, but 2 days later you forget about it. That's going to create problems. If you have anxiety, you might overreact to when your kids are getting in trouble. If you have depression, which often manifests as irritability, you're going to have a harder time being patient when your child is misbehaving or yelling or screaming and you just want to go in bed and forget about the day. So child's temperament affects how they react to parenting. Some kids are naturally, easygoing, and even if you get upset with them, they just move on. They don't let it hold on. But other kids are very sensitive, and you raise your voice just a little bit, and they think you're upset with them. They react very strongly. So for that child, you may be a little bit more gentle and calmer when you're talking to them because that works well because you don't want to overwhelm them. There's another child you may not have to be as careful because they can handle, even if you yell at them a little bit. And kids will tell me sometimes, yeah, mom was yelling about it, but I know she was mad and she had a right to be mad. So that's not really causing damage for that particular kid. That kid does not think, oh, my mom hates me because she's yelling at me. Every child is different. Not all techniques work for everyone. So this is important as well. That I'm going to throw out a lot of different techniques as we go through the talk today. If you are in therapy, I would always encourage you to work with your child's therapist to see if this technique would make sense for your particular child. And again, be careful about feeling bad that a technique is not working for one of your kids. That's where counseling comes into play. Because then you can problem solve together as to, okay, knowing my particular child, how can we deal with this? All right. Let me give you just a couple other things here. Anxious kids will overreact if you are trying to get them to go out and play or even to go to school. Anxious kids can have a very bad temper. I mean, they may just fall apart because they're fearful that something really bad is going to happen to them if they're separated from you. And again, if you respond with anger, that's not going to work very well. If you respond with compassion, say, I know how worried you are about this. What can we do to make this a little bit better for you? Kids with bipolar disorder have severe mood swings. And so you may just say one little thing and that just sends them into orbit, and they're going to have a much harder time calming down. Kids with ADHD have a hard time paying attention, so they're going to forget to do things. They're going to say, okay, I'll go clean my room, mom. And then next thing you know, they're playing with something there. It's not because they're misbehaving, it's because they get distracted by something that is fun. And they may totally forget about the thing that they were supposed to do when you asked them to go to clean their room. All right. So let me talk about Love and Logic Parenting a little bit. Their website, if you are interested in this technique and it feels like this is something you could do, please check out their website. They've got some great books. They've actually got some of their books on CDs, probably downloads as well, so that you can learn some of the strategies. And under Love and Logic Parenting, there's 4 basic goals. You want to help kids feel good about themselves, because if you work with them in a way that helps them feel good about themselves, they're more likely to want to do good things. They're more likely to please you. They're more likely to be confident when it comes to solving a problem at school, for example, or dealing with a situation with friends. You want to help kids learn to solve problems and think for themselves. So you have to be, the normal parent thing, I think, is to lecture and teach kids, oh, well, you need to do this, this, and this. Well, if you want kids to be your friend, you need to do this. If you want to do better at school, you need to bring your books home, you need to write it down, blah, blah, blah. Some of this just goes in one ear and out the other. And if you're solving the problem for them, they don't learn the skill. So when your child comes to you with a problem, to say, hi, that's a problem. I can see why you're upset about that. You know, what are some things you can do that might help? So that way you're trying to get them to brainstorm first. If you're going to give a suggestion and they can't come up with anything, you can say, hey, would you like some suggestions? Again, this is not a normal parenting thing to say, but it really works well if you want to raise your kids to be responsible and feel a healthy sense of control and feel good about themselves. What are some things that you could do about this? I remember working with one of my patients, and he was maybe 12 years old, and I was having an issue with somebody else, and I said, hey, can I get your advice on something? And he looks at me and he says, me? You want me? You want my advice? And he just sort of straightened up in his chair and say, okay, yeah, what's the problem? And think about that. If you can get to that point with a child and they feel really good about being able to help you, that goes a long way towards developing a healthy self-esteem. Leaving them with a healthy sense of control. And this is the part about making choices, that as much as possible, let your child make choices, even if it's just a couple of choices. If they're 3 or 4 years old, you want to wear the red shirt or the blue shirt today, because once they have a sense of control of what's going on, they're more likely to cooperate. Even something like homework. If you say, hey, would you like to do your homework right after school, or would you like to do it after dinner? Now, some of you are saying, well, maybe doing it after dinner isn't so good, because if you have ADHD and you're on medication, it's going to wear off. But you can do a trial period. You can say, well, tell you what, if you really want to do it after dinner, let's try that for a week and see how it goes. If your way of doing it works, we'll just keep doing it your way. But if your way doesn't work, then we try my way. How does that sound? And you could even shake hands with your kid. Okay, it's a deal. Their motivation to try to make this work is going to be very high. If they can't make it work, it just means that maybe they were overly optimistic and overestimated their ability to be focused enough after dinner to do their homework. Teach them to be responsible for the consequences of their actions. Hopefully by the things I've been saying so far, that one's a little bit more obvious. Okay, let's see. So the 3 F's, friendly, firm, and fair. That as much as possible in your parenting, strive to be friendly, which refers to your approach to your child, firm, so that they know if a decision's been made, you're going to stand by it, but also fair, because if your child perceives it as fair, they're less likely to complain about it. To give you an example, recently, I was working with an 8-year-old, and he did something that he got in trouble for, and mom gave him he had to pay for something that he destroyed. And I said to him, I asked him, I said, well, do you think that the consequence was fair? And he looks at me, he thinks about it, and he goes, honestly, yes. And that is awesome, because if he understands that it's fair and that it's logically related to what he did wrong, destroying something, then he's not going to fight it so much. He's taking the consequences, which is very good. Lock in your love before and while talking with your child about the consequences of their actions. And by locking in your love, you do that by your tone, by the words that you choose, to be able to be loving about it, so that they know that you love them no matter what. Empathize with your child when upset at facing the consequences makes it easier for them to handle. You mean I can't go outside because I didn't do my homework? And you can say, yeah, I know. That's not fair, Mom. I know you're really upset about it. But tomorrow you have a chance to make a different decision. And they stomp away or whatever. You can empathize if they're upset about it. It's okay to be upset about it because actually that's what you need. You need to be upset if you make a mistake so that you learn from it. Setting limits in a firm but loving way, again, using your tone, staying calm. We talk a little bit about three types of parents: drill sergeant, helicopter, and consultant. You're probably all familiar with helicopter parenting, kids spotted a mile away. So let me explain. And actually, if you go onto the Love and Logic website, you'll see some free downloads, and they talk about these different types of parents. And just briefly, the drill sergeant parent is just as it sounds. That parent wants kids, you give the orders and your kids obey, no questions asked. The helicopter parent hovers and is waiting for their child to make a mistake or run into trouble and then swoops in to rescue them. The consultant parent is one who consults as an expert with your child, but still giving the child some say-so and kind of how to deal with that. Now, the problem with the drill sergeant parent is if they simply learn to obey you no matter what, no questions asked, they're not learning how to make good decisions. These kids are also more likely to get into trouble during their teenage years, because if you're teaching them to listen to whatever an adult tells them to do, that's going to be transferred to the peer group. That child is probably going to have a hard time saying no to somebody who is using alcohol or drugs or engaging in other behavior, stealing. Also, if your child learns that you can never say no to an adult, that puts them at risk for child abuse. Kids need to learn to say no. They just need to do it in a respectful way. And that's part of, as you're teaching your child, you're teaching them how to express feelings in respectful ways. The helicopter parent is basically conveying the message to their child that he or she is incompetent, cannot handle problems, cannot handle consequences. And that way you rescue them so they don't feel bad about their behavior. Again, that teaches them not to feel good about themselves and not to take responsibility. It'd be better to get a low grade and allow your child to experience that low grade so that they're more motivated to do something about it later than to rescue them, to be up till 2 a.m. working with your child on completing a project that they knew was due 2 weeks ago. That's sending the wrong message, in my opinion. The consultant parent, again, is a consultant. When your child's having an issue, to reframe the issue and say, well, what do you think you might do about that? Or would you like some ideas as to how you might solve it? Okay, well, one thing you might consider is this. For example, you're having a fight with your brother over who goes first in the game. And say, okay, well, one thing would be to take turns. Another thing would be, flip a coin. So what do you think about that idea? Would you guys be willing to try this and see if that helps? That's the consultant parent. So again, the consultant gives you enough information, some things to think about, but still allows the child to own the results of that. All right, let's go over punishment. A lot of parents disagree with me when I tell them that punishment is the least effective form of discipline. And I'm not saying that it's never an appropriate consequence, but punishment basically is trying to make kids miserable, try to make them feel bad, really bad about what they did, hoping that they will learn. The problem with this, one of the problems is it tends to provoke anger. Because the same with adults. Imagine going into work and you didn't do something on a report you're supposed to run, and you had to go fix the mistake. And what if your boss says, "Hey, reach into your wallet, I want $50 back of your pay because you messed up, and you better not mess up again." You're going to be upset. You're going to be anxious. Those aren't the greatest ways of teaching. So think about that. Put yourself in your child's position when it comes to things like that. Again, making kids miserable comes with a cost, and that increasing severity often backfires. For example, if you ground a child for a week for stealing, and then they steal something else, so okay, now it's going to be 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks consequence. That's going to backfire. Most parents can't impose a consequence that long. And also, what else do you do? If they're already grounded, it's sort of like having 3 life sentences. That third life sentence doesn't provide any motivation to avoid misbehaving, or in this case, breaking the law. So shorter consequences often work better. Dr. Ross Greene wrote a book, The Explosive Child, and if you have kids who are struggling especially with their temper and having emotional meltdowns that can, last for 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, etc. Uh, this book is a really good one to have. And Dr. Green talks about lagging skills. He believes that kids do well when they can. If they can handle a situation in a constructive way, that's what they're going to do. If they can't, they may have lagging skills. So the lagging skill might be calming oneself down. The lagging skill may be taking turns. And so if you look at it that way, then your focus becomes on how can I teach this to my child to do better in this area? What skills are lagging, and how can I help my child, again, do better, which is taking a proactive approach. Dr. Green has a website, livesinthebalance.org. He gives you some handouts on all sorts of things to do where you sort of assess a child's behavior, try to figure out what the lagging skills are, and how to approach it in a way that that works. Give you another example of that. Uh, Conflict management. If your child is constantly getting into trouble with siblings or friends, that lagging skill might be managing conflict. And so if you look at it that way, one of the ways you want to handle it is to teach them some of those skills, whether it's taking turns, taking a break, helping them empathize with the person they're playing with, that it's not fair if they're always cheating. And when you're teaching those skills, again, they're more likely to pick them up instead of just punishing them. Because the other thing is punishment doesn't teach. You're not learning a skill by being punished. Having said that, sometimes it works. Sometimes a consequence of not being able to go out, or not being able to play video games because they didn't do their work. That is a punishment, but I think it's better to look at it, if you can flip it around, I think it tends to work better. For example, better to start with nothing. And if they behave well, they get the reward. If they don't behave well, for example, not doing their homework, the consequence is they didn't earn the game time. So you're not taking the game time as a as a punishment. They just didn't earn it, and they can earn it again the next day. And I think that works better. Think about it. If you start the day at a job, and the harder you work, the more money you make, you're going to be motivated. Instead, you start a job getting all of your money from the first minute, and then every time you mess up, you start losing income. That tends not to work so well. Like I said, it comes with a cost. It tends to backfire. It creates resentment in kids. And if you're creating resentment, they're going to try to express their frustrations in other ways. All right. Taking a proactive approach, let me just go back to that really quick. What that also means is that that if you help kids, if you can think of or anticipate a situation, for example, your child invites friends over and you know what tends to happen. If you're proactive, instead of having a consequence occur once the problems start, to say, well, hey, you know, Billy, every time you bring friends over, usually you guys get into fights and then people get upset and all of that. So what are some things you could do differently this time that might prevent that from happening? That way you're, how do you need to address them? What would you think about letting them go first or pick the game that they're going to play? How does that sound? So again, you're teaching them some skills. You're trying to avoid the problem. And if you teach them the skills and you avoid the problem, you don't need a punishment because they're going to be more motivated to do what you're asking them to do. All right. Let's see. One other thing about punishments. Natural consequences, what I mentioned earlier, natural consequences are things that occur when you do nothing. If you don't study for a test, you're going to get a bad grade. If you don't do your homework, you're going to get a 0. Well, not always a 0, but I won't go there right now. If you have some of the school systems, I think Prince William's one of them, is that you can't get less than a 50% if you get a 0. The problem is kids then figure out, okay, it's not going to count as much against me. It may or may not be motivating. Hopefully they're doing some studies to find out if that actually works better. So if you can't use natural consequences, then as much as possible you want to use logical consequences. And logical consequences are those that are related to the problem, but not, but you need to impose. For example, a natural consequence is getting a bad grade for not doing homework or not studying. Okay, a logical consequence might be a parent saying, "Hey, I was really looking forward to playing a game with you this evening, but then you told me that you refused to do your homework, and so I don't really feel like I want to play with you because I work really hard at my job, and if you're not working hard at your job, I'm just going to feel bad about that. If you have that approach, and the child thinks, oh, okay, so maybe I'll think about it differently. Maybe I'll do something different. Another example might be kids who don't take care of their clothes. So if you're buying them really nice clothes and they don't take care of them, they lose them, they cut holes in them, or whatever. A logical consequence would be not buying them any more new clothes. Say, well, I get upset if I spend my hard-earned money buying nice clothes for you and then you ruin them. So I don't get resentful. I'm just going to buy from Goodwill or Salvation Army. That way, if I only paid $2 for a shirt, I'm not going to be so upset if you rip it. So that would be a logical consequence. All right. Hold on 1 second. We will come back to that. All right. I'm going to go into positive discipline next. And positive discipline is related to all the things that we've talked about so far. So think about this. The goal is to teach children self-control and empathy. So when you're teaching self-control and helping them empathize with others, that can go a long way towards reducing more hurtful behaviors. If your child can think, hey, if I refuse to play with my little brother and he's really sad and then he's going to yell and scream, I don't want my brother to, I don't like playing with him, but I don't want him to feel sad. So maybe you agree to play with him for a little bit. Okay. Collaborative and proactive solutions goes back to what I was saying earlier in terms of trying to, this is the Ross Green's approach when you're talking about lagging skills. And the idea of collaborative and proactive solutions mean that if you have a problem area, that you collaborate with your child to come up with some solutions proactively, so instead of waiting for the problem to occur, trying to keep the problem from occurring. If that makes sense. This goes along with asking for kids for ideas on how to tackle problems. If you present, hey, bedtime's a problem. Every time at night I'm trying to get you to go to bed, you're screaming and yelling. How can we make this better? It could be trying to do bedtime a little bit earlier. It could be once they're in bed, you read to them, but asking children for their ideas on how to tackle a problem. Again, they may come up with something. If they come up with it and you're okay with it, they're more motivated to continue that approach, and they've learned something valuable. Unmet expectations are unsolved problems. And think about how that sounds. It's a more hopeful way of looking at it. If your child is having a problem, it's unsolved. So your job in collaboration with your child is to figure out, how do we solve this problem? Thinking of the values you want to instill in your child. Again, caring, sharing, helping out. And if you teach them how to do that, they're going to get along better, whether it's holding the door open for you or asking if you need help. Hey, hey, Dad, I see you got a whole carload full of groceries. Can I help you out? Do you need a hand? Can I help you with dinner? And I work on teaching kids those skills. And it goes so well because if they offer help to people, they're going to be better. They're going to be well liked. They're going to be appreciated more. They're going to feel better about themselves. And so, again, this is something that you want to instill in your child so that they learn those skills. With positive discipline, one of the things you have to keep in mind, hurtful words are like daggers to the heart, sort of like nails in wood. And you may have heard that analogy. That if you put a nail in a piece of wood, you can pull it out, but the wood is forever damaged. You can fill it in, but it never is fully as good as it was before. So that's why it is so important to really monitor what you say to your kids. All right. Let me go on to some teenage challenges. Today's teens face many stressors: grades, social media, video games, drugs, alcohol, sexual activity. This makes it harder to navigate and to prioritize. That playing video games all night with your friends is certainly far more fun than having to do your homework and going to bed on time. And if your child plays online games with kids across the country or across the world, they're more motivated to be up in the middle of the night if that's where their friends are, because it's daytime where they are. Obviously, these things have very serious consequences. Poor grades can keep you from getting into college. We know that kids who don't go to college generally earn less over the course of their lifetimes. Social media can be very obsessive. It can lead to online bullying. As you probably know, there have been teenagers who've committed suicide after being bullied online or after ex-boyfriends shared explicit pictures with their friends and it gets posted online. Um, Drugs and alcohol obviously have serious consequences if they get involved with those things, especially as teenagers, because it changes the way in which their brains operate. Sexual activity, obviously the risk for pregnancy, STDs, things like that. I believe teens need adult guidance more than ever to try to navigate these things. Um, the second family becomes more important. The second family is a concept that basically states that if you think of development for kids, their biological family is their first family, parents, siblings, etc. The second family becomes their peers, and their peers become much more important during the teenage years. And your kids want to spend more time with their peers because that's a stepping stone towards growing up, where they're more independent of you. So if you think, oh, my kid she or she always wants to be with the friends, that's not a bad thing. That's a normal, healthy thing. You have to set limits if they're neglecting their responsibilities as a result, but it's normal that the second family is so important. It's one of the reasons why you need to teach your kids how to say no respectfully, because saying no to peers is very difficult. As you can imagine, if everybody's getting high and passing a blunt or whatever, it's hard to be the one to say, no, I'm not going to do that. It takes a lot of assertiveness to be able to say that. So the key when working with teenagers in particular is to listen more than you lecture, because lecturing just goes in one ear out the other. Hopefully you know that by now. So if you listen to what your teenager is saying, even if they're telling you why they think marijuana is okay, to be able to reflect that back, so you say, okay, so what you're trying to tell me is you think this is okay behavior because of this reasons. Okay, are there any other reasons? So that way, if we listen to them and emphasize that they have the ability to make choices. And what I mean by this is that it doesn't mean that you just let them do what they want. But what you're trying to do is prevent a confrontation. I'll give you an example. Uh, your teenager threatens to just leave the house at 10 at night, right? I'm not going to listen to you. I'm just going out. And you as a parent say, don't you dare go out. And now those are fighting words. And you're not going to just drag them out or drag them back into the house. You can't really do that. And obviously they can sneak at other times. What you can say is, it is your decision. I understand that you may decide something that goes against our rules here. So if you choose to leave the house against our wishes, something very sad will happen upon your return. So please think carefully about your choice. And they might say to you, well, what are you going to do? A love and logic approach is, I love you too much to argue about it. Or, you'll find out when I'm ready for you to find out. You're maintaining that control. The goal of that type of parenting approach is you want them to think about it. You want their anxiety level to go up. And if your child says, okay, fine, and stomps up to his room or her room, that's fine. You have succeeded. They're not happy, but they made a good decision. And you can give them credit for that later. Probably not in the moment, but later. Now, if they do choose to leave, they may come back and find, their electronics are all locked up or put in the trunk or given to another parent for safekeeping, and that they can earn those items back based on their behavior. Because again, you can't actually forbid teens from doing things you dislike. If you think of even sexual activity, most parents think that teenagers are too young, and obviously there are serious consequences. You're not going to be able to prevent it entirely, but having a conversation with your child as to at what point would they think that would be an okay decision for them to make, and then you can share some of your concerns as well. So again, if you listen to their concerns and then you let them know calmly what your concerns are, they're more likely to at least consider what you're saying when they're making their decision. Same with smoking marijuana. Say, I can't stop you from smoking marijuana with your friends. I'm 100% opposed to it. I think you're too young and it causes problems. But if you're going to choose to get high with your friends, and then you're going to ask me to borrow the car, I'm not going to let you borrow the car. And the reason for that is that if I let you drive the car, knowing that you smoke weed, and you get into an accident, we can be sued as your parents because we knew that you were doing it and we let you drive anyway. So we can't do that because then our insurance rates go up and bad things can happen. So if you're going to choose to smoke weed, I'm not going to allow you to drive the car. That's not fair. It doesn't affect me. I understand, but this is our rule, and we know that you're not happy about it. When you're an adult living on your own, you certainly can make that decision totally, but we're not going to support you in making that decision. Again, a very different way of approaching the situation. All right. And what you can do, and this is what I do as a therapist, is engage in more of a harm reduction method that I will tell teenagers it's not a healthy choice because as your brain develops, your brain's going to develop as a teenager expecting THC. And when you stop using it, if you have to stop later on for whatever reasons, you may never go back to normal completely. And if you can only enjoy your life when you're high, you're going to have a harder time enjoying life later. So something that might have been a really fun experience later becomes just so-so if you're not using. Be sure you're not working harder than your teen. An A kid results in an A parent. So let me explain this one. So, for example, if you are frustrated because you are working hard at your job, making money, providing for your kids' needs, and you don't feel like they're working very hard, and you buy them all this stuff or let them do things, and you get resentful, that's probably teaching your kids the wrong thing. So, for example, if you ask your child, well, how do you think you're doing as a teenager, as a member of our family? What grade would you give yourself for school? And the level of effort you're putting in. Okay, a C. And you're okay with a C? Okay. And what grade would you give yourself for being a member of our family? In terms of things you do to help out. Oh, okay, so you hardly ever offer. So maybe you're like a D kid when it comes to chores. Well, I'm working really hard, and I think I'm an A parent. And so as an A parent, there's certain things I'll buy for myself because I feel like I deserve them. But I don't want to be resentful of you if you're a C kid. So if you're going to be a C kid, then I'm going to be a C parent with you. So an A parent might get their kids the latest iPhone, for example. But a C parent or D parent is probably going to get them, a much older phone because it doesn't cost me as much, and that way I don't have to be resentful. Or an A parent might shop at, whatever store is, Forever 21, whatever store's popular with teens these days. But a C parent, is going to shop at Walmart for clothes. Now, not there's anything wrong with that. I've gotten some very good clothes from Walmart myself. But if you think of the reaction of your teen, if you say, well, this is what I'm going to do from now on, if you're not doing your fair share at home, it makes them think about it. That's a good example of a consequence. It's not a punishment, but you're matching your level of effort to their level of effort. And it gives them something to think about. Okay. All right. Let's talk a little bit about spanking. Spanking is rarely, if ever, a good punishment. Research shows multiple negative effects of spanking, including more anger problems, lower self-esteem, more anxiety, higher rates of addiction. Spanking can also damage your relationship with your child because if you have to go to that level, that can be very destructive. Because if your child now fears you, that child is going to be less likely to come to you with problems, for example, later on. Child Protective Services can become involved. In the state of Virginia, spanking, corporal punishment is legal. But if you leave bruises or marks or things like that, and therapists, teachers, others are, doctors are mandated reporters. And so you could be reported to Child Protective Services. And if they get involved in your life, they get to basically tell you what to do. They may even take your child from your home. So nobody wants that. Think about also that spanking can teach kids that it's okay to hit when they're angry, right? And if you're spanking your child because your child is hitting somebody else or a sibling, again, that's hypocritical in a way, if you think about it. Spanking also can teach kids not to get caught. If the consequences are so severe and they think maybe 2 out of 3 times they're going to get away with it, then their approach may be just going behind your back, which creates all sorts of problems as well. Now, if you're having trouble with this, it may reflect your own difficulty with anger control or taking your child's misbehavior personally. And so if you have issues with that, I would strongly urge you to get some help. If your child is in therapy, your child's therapist should be willing to meet with you individually as well as needed and talk with you about some different ways of handling it. Sometimes getting therapy for yourself can be very useful. If one of the things, and this is just some food for thought, getting off topic a little bit, sometimes kids will remind you as a parent of your siblings. For example, if your older brother was a bully to you, would tease you, make fun of you, etc., and then you have a son who's acting similarly to that brother, you may overreact, not because of exactly what your child is doing, but because it triggers feelings from your own family experiences. So if that's the case, again, it's good to get help for that. Let's see. Modeling respect. So remember that you as a parent are your child's role model for how to treat others. What you model for them and how they see you with others, including other family members, teachers in public places. Again, they're watching you the whole time. So if they see you being disrespectful to people, they're more likely to be disrespectful on their own. So if you want your kids to grow up to be polite, you need to be polite to them as well. Saying please and thank you regularly to them when they do something, even if it's something that they're supposed to do, regularly lets them know that you appreciate and you respect them. Okay. Keep in mind also how you react in public. If they see you chewing out teachers, or they see you and your spouse arguing and yelling and things like that, that's not modeling respect. And so don't be surprised if they go out and treat other people the same way. I also think that kids benefit when adults are willing to admit fault and apologize. If you are in a close relationship with somebody, at some point you're going to say or do something that hurts their feelings. If you apologize and say, hey, this was my fault, I'm really sorry, I shouldn't have yelled, that helps repair the relationship, because every time things get out of hand, that creates a tear in the relationship. Now, this doesn't mean that they're going to learn their lesson the first time. How many of you may have said to your kids, sorry isn't good enough? You keep saying you're sorry and yet you keep doing it all over and over again. Be very careful about saying something like that, because remember, kids are disciples. They are learning. They're learning how to manage their emotions. They're learning how to be respectful even when they're angry. So it's really important that they say that they're sorry and apologize. Just like it's really important for you to apologize to them. It doesn't mean that there'll never be a problem. You can apologize for yelling at your kids, and I can guarantee you there'll be another time where you're going to yell or overreact and have to say you're sorry, and the same with the kids. So this is a learning experience. Remember also that kids, our brains don't fully mature until we're 25 years old. And the part of the brain that matures last is the frontal lobes of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. And that's the part that thinks, plans, organizes, and is able to control the emotional centers of the brain. So this is an ongoing process, right? One thing I want to mention here too is that respect doesn't mean that your kids get to call the shots, okay? Families are not democracies. Families are benevolent dictatorships. That you have the right to set rules for the family. You are the dictator. But you're benevolent because you allow input from your kids. So they can have some input into the process, but ultimately, you're the boss. And even though if they're unhappy about that, that's life. Just like if they're at work, their boss is the boss. You can't just say, no, I'm not going to listen to you if you expect to keep your job. All right. Apologizing also is a sign of strength. Sometimes parents will see it as a sign of weakness, which I don't fully understand. If you're strong enough and feel good enough about yourself that you can say, I messed up, that implies strength. It means that you don't feel like you're losing respect of your child. It doesn't mean like you're in a one down position. You're just owning it and moving on. All right, let me move on to using incentive systems and behavior charts. Okay, using an incentive system can help increase a motivation for undesirable or boring tasks. Most kids don't like doing homework, cleaning their room, helping with the dishes, etc. If they have mental health issues like ADHD or depression, anxiety, that motivation may be even lower. So one of the things you want to do by using an incentive system is increase their motivation by using a reward. As I said earlier as well, we all operate that way to some extent. So using an incentive system can help teach kids responsibility, math skills if they're having to calculate, how many points or how much money they've earned, budgeting their money that they earn. It can also boost self-esteem because if you use your own hard-earned money to buy something, you're more likely to take care of it. Okay. It is essential to get your child's input. For example, do you want them to earn money? Do you want them to earn points, privileges? There are a lot of different ways of doing it. Some kids will tell me, I want to get paid every day. Other kids will say, well, wait till the end of the week. And that's where parents need to be consistent, that if you have a payday, whatever it's a day or a week, you have to stick with it. Because if you're unreliable, you can't expect your children just to take this on. So you need to be sure that they're not getting too many unearned rewards. If your children have everything they need or want, where's the motivation? Okay. If you're a millionaire and you got $1 million in the bank, how motivated are you going to be to go to a job at Walmart, for example? You don't need it because you've already got plenty. So you want to make sure that they need some money. This is something that they want and have to earn. Negotiating and compromising is part of the process. If you come up with a system and you're not sure that you like it, but you say, "I'll tell you what, we'll give it a trial period." That also shows faith in your children that they want to succeed. They want to make this work as well, and that maybe it would work and it would be fine. If it doesn't work, then you go to plan B. Talking about the chart is part of the process. So it's not just looking at the points and adding them up. It's about talking about everything. It's talking about, okay, hey, it's a new week. It's Sunday. So what are your goals this week in terms of your chart? Like, how hard do you want to work this week? Is there anything that you're saving up for? Okay. So and how many points would you need to earn a trip to, I don't know, King's Dominion or whatever it might be? How many points would you have to earn? Okay, so how long do you think it would take you? So you can do that calculating. Again, you're putting a child in charge of it. What I think usually works well, and there's a handout, you'll see a link at the bottom of the screen here. Check that out. You can print it out. It gives you some ideas of how to put a chart together. What are some problems that can occur as a result, and some ways to address those problems. Okay. So one of the ways I recommend parents do it is you may have 4 or 5, 6, whatever items are on your list, and you check them off each day. To expect your kids to remember to check them off, probably not going to happen, especially if they have ADHD. So you have to do part of that as well. And I recommend, like, for example, say maybe a half an hour before, like say 6:30 or 7 o'clock, whatever it is, to give one reminder to your child to say, hey, you got about 30 minutes left before we check the chart. We do that every night at 7 o'clock or whatever. So if there's any things that you didn't do today that you want to earn, now would be your time. Again, you're not pushing, you're just suggesting. And some kids will start going all over the place and working real hard to try to get it all done, and that's fine. I mean, you get to set what that time frame is, but if they are doing it, that tells you that they want to earn the rewards. And then at the end of that day, you can say, okay, well, I see. How did you do with this one? Okay, so you earned this amount. Cool, way to go. Are you pleased with how much you earned, or is there something that you're a little disappointed about? And then you can say, okay, so what's your goal for tomorrow? How many points could you earn tomorrow, and how do you want to handle that? So again, it's the talking about that that makes a difference. And that talking is actually improving your attachment with your kids and your kids to you, because you're treating them with respect. You're being a consultant parent by listening to their input and making it clear that they make those choices. Blue light special at Kmart to boost motivation. If you remember the blue light specials, basically, if you have something on your chart that consistently doesn't get done, then you need to analyze that and figure out, okay, what's the problem here? Am I not paying enough? Is there something about that task that's really hard? And so that could be a surprise. And if you can say, okay, Wednesday is blue light special for, I don't know, vacuuming. If you choose to vacuum the whole top floor by 7 o'clock tonight, you can earn double points or triple points. And you put it out there. And again, if it works and your child starts doing it, it says, oh, okay, so the incentive wasn't strong enough. Maybe this is a task that's particularly hard. So let's figure out how to change that incentive so that we get this behavior more often. All right, let's see. Now, not all behaviors should be addressed using a chart. Kindness, offering to help, because you can't reward everything. So try to pick the most important things here, the things that are easily observed, the things that maybe are quantifiable, because otherwise if you're rewarding for everything, it's just going to be too much. Okay. All right. Let's see. One other thing I want to mention about behavior charts and just behavior in general. One of the things that we have found is if you are trying to improve a behavior and you praise or are using, like if you're asking them to do something and you use praise or hug or kiss, whatever, that actually increases the motivation. Likewise, if your child does something that you've asked and you go to them and maybe give them a kiss on the head and say, hey, thank you so much. I really appreciate you helping me out today. That actually increases the likelihood substantially that that same behavior will occur in the future. So that kind of praise and affection for doing good things can go a long way. All right, here's an example of the chart that I have online. This gives you some ideas about how you can do it. We got chores here, school, family. And notice how it's put it here. Keeping your hands to yourself is better than no hitting. Okay, no hitting is just the negative of it. But if you say what you have to do is keep your hands to yourself, you're actually you're going to get more cooperation if you make it that specific, keeping it positive. Giving compliments, sometimes that helps. If you teach kids to give compliments, it tends to improve relationships in general. Again, it doesn't mean that you're going to use all of these. Pick and choose what you think would be most important. And there's spaces here to add things. And there's also a totally blank chart at the end of that handout that you can use to tailor your own chart. All right. So let me go to timeout. Punishment or coping strategy. Usually when a child needs a timeout, it's because their coping strategies are maxed out and they can't calm themselves down. Okay, they're becoming disorganized in their emotional functioning and regressing to almost like being infants, which can be very frustrating for a parent. But when they get to that point, when they're overwhelmed and they're acting like a child much younger, think about how you would intervene with a younger child. Sometimes when they're overwhelmed, they need a hug, they need physical affection, even if it's something that's upsetting to them. So, because again, once they get overwhelmed, they'll either go into fight or flight. Oh, sorry about that. Either they'll go into fight or flight mode and their thinking ability shuts down. So if they're overloaded emotionally and they're not really thinking, trying to tell them what they did wrong or tell them to do something differently, they simply may not be able to hear it in that moment. So that's why sometimes they need that calming. Just like if a baby's is very upset and you calm the baby, you hold it, pat her back and say, hey, it's going to be okay. That helps them regulate themselves. And once they've regulated themselves, then you're free to have a discussion. There's actually something called neural hijacking that might help you understand this. Basically, when your brain goes into fight or flight mode in reaction to perceiving danger, what happens is the thinking part of your brain shuts off because you don't need that thinking part if you're trying to stay alive. So if you are being chased by a wild animal and you stop and think about, hey, I wonder how I should deal with this. Gee, should I run? Should I walk? Should I try to negotiate with this tiger chasing me? I'm not really sure what the thing to do is. And you stop and think, which we often tell kids, stop and think about what you're doing. When you're in fight or flight mode, that thinking will get you killed. So you react by instinct. So that's what's going on. And that's why it's so important to help kids calm down. So a timeout works best if either child or parent initiates it. If you are feeling overwhelmed by emotion, it's perfectly fine to say, I'm too mad to talk about this with you right now. Give me about a half hour, an hour, and we'll come back again at this particular time and we'll try to talk about it again. That's a really positive skill to teach. You need to give your kids the same ability to call a timeout. And they may not be able to think about it in the moment to say, hey, do you need a timeout to just chill out and calm yourself down? Is there something I can do to help you calm down? Or do you just need to go in a corner and be by yourself? Because everybody calms down in different ways. So again, it's not rejection or, go to timeout now. You've been hit for the last time. If you have that approach, again, then it becomes a really bad thing. And if they're overwhelmed by emotion, really they need to connect with you to calm down. They don't necessarily need more separation, at least emotionally. And if you're criticizing them and yelling at them for it, that's not so good. All right, let's go back here. All right. And letting them know that you understand their anger and frustration, and then allows you to help them to calm down enough to hear what you have to say. So again, look at it that way. You're trying to help them calm down. That is the goal here. Many behavioral specialists still advocate using timeout. It can be helpful for some kids. It's okay if it works. You've probably heard the guideline 1 minute per year old. So if you're 5 years old, you get 5 minutes of timeout. Again, think about what it teaches. If your child seems to learn well from it, and they can come back and you talk about it, which again is part of timeout as well. Hey, honey, why did I put you in timeout? Yeah, because you were trying to hit me, and is hitting allowed in our family? No. So what can you do next time so this doesn't keep happening? Well, I could ask for help. Could be something like that, or I could go to my room, or I could punch a pillow, whatever it might be. So that the talking about it is helpful. It's not just go into timeout and I'm done with you. You don't want to give them that impression, because you don't want them to feel bad about themselves because they're overwhelmed with anger. That produces shame, and that's not helpful on multiple skills. All right. So what I'd like to do now is talk about some additional parenting tools and strategies. Some of these I may have mentioned a little bit, but I want to highlight these. They are consistent with some of the things that I've talked with you earlier. So let me just go through these. So avoiding repeating directions and giving kids too many chances. If you're having to yell at your kids 5 times to stop doing something or to get ready for bed, and then by that 6th time or whatever, you're screaming and yelling, and finally your kids do what you have to do, what you're asking them to do, you're actually teaching kids that the first 5 times you asked them were meaningless. Those are freebies, that you really didn't mean business until you got to the 6th or 7th time. So you don't want to do that. Because again, if you give too many chances, it just enables them to avoid. They just see it as extra time before you really mean it. So, 1, 2, 3 magic, you may be familiar with this concept, but it's okay to count to 3, for example. Say, okay, I'm going to count to 3, or I'm going to give you 3 chances. If I have to go, I'll give you 1 reminder. If I have to remind you a 3rd time, there will be a consequence. So think about how you want to handle this. Would work better, okay? Plan ahead, anticipate problem situations. The example I gave you for kid in a 2 or 3 year old in the grocery store at night. For some kids, if you have too many kids over, maybe you have 5 or 6 kids, it gets unmanageable. So maybe for your child may only be able to handle 1 or 2 at a time. So if that's the case, then you take that into account so that you're avoiding those problem situations. Be flexible. Consistent doesn't mean rigid, okay? It is okay to change your mind. It is okay to say you impose a consequence and your child talks to you about it and you think about it and you say, you have a good point. How about this? Maybe I reacted a little too strongly. How about if we try this? And you let them know, okay, maybe they want an extra 10 minutes before going to bed because of whatever it is. So if you're flexible with them, it also shows that you are respectful, that they have some input. And again, I'm going to repeat this again. When they have some input into a decision, they're more likely to follow through. So another way to look at it is it gets buy-in from a child when they get some impact. Using I message instead of you messages. This is a popular psychological concept. And the idea of this is that if you say, you made me mad, or you misbehaved last time, you're going to your room, those are you messages. They tend to be more accusatory, blaming, and make kids feel bad about themselves. An I message would be something like this. Hey, I'm really upset because you promised that you would do this, do your homework, and we could play a game afterward, but you're choosing not to do it or to ask me for help. And so I don't really feel like playing a game with you if you're not keeping your end of the deal. That's sharing your feeling. It's telling your child the emotional consequence of his or her choices and gives them a chance to turn it around and make good on it. So what you're trying to do is actually elicit some empathy from them. And when you empathize with somebody that you're disagreeing with, you're not going to be so hurtful. Giving choices whenever possible. Again, if you're trying to raise a good decision maker instead of a good obedient, soldier who's going to do whatever you tell them to do, you're going to have to give them choices. You want to improve their decision-making ability. But the choices are ones that are equally acceptable to you. For example, if you give your child a choice as to when to do a chore or when to complete homework, it doesn't really matter time-wise as long as it gets done by a certain period, a certain time. For example, whether it's at 3 o'clock, 5 o'clock, or 8 o'clock, as long as it gets done within your parameters, you probably would be okay with it. If it doesn't work, then clearly it's not working. So you give the kids a choice, and if that doesn't work, then you may have to give them more input as to what you're going to do with them. But choices increase buy-in. So keep that in mind. Giving kids in fantasy what they can't have in reality. What I mean by this is that it's normal that kids sometimes wish they didn't have any siblings, wish they could get rid of their annoying younger brother or whatever it might be. So obviously that can happen, and kids know that as well. So an example might be, well, I know that you don't really like my rules at home. I understand. If you were in charge here and you were the parent, what are some rules that you would make? And it might be no bedtime, eat ice cream all day, all night, whatever it might be. You can say, wow, those are some pretty cool things. What do you think would happen if your rules were the case here? And then you talk about it, maybe you laugh about it a little bit and say, okay, so you really think that could happen here? No, but you kind of wish it would. Yeah, okay, I can understand why you would wish for that. If they realize that you understand what they would like, but that it's not possible, you can't send your little brother back to where he came from. That's not how it works. But to have that feeling is okay. It just means that you're frustrated, and who wouldn't want to get all the attention to themselves? So when you do that, it helps them accept reality when you understand that they're not happy about it. Again, teaching values, not just rules. Again, when you're talking with your kids, you're always displaying your role modeling values. So keep that in mind. It's not just about following rules. Making good behavior fun. This works really well. For example, if you're having to clean up and you put a timer in and say, okay, we got 3 minutes to clean up. If we clean up together, then we get to do this. Okay, let's go. And you set the stopwatch. All of a sudden, kids are much more motivated because it makes it more fun. I do that in my office all the time. There's a cleanup timer. So one of those 3-minute sand timers. And if you can clean up when the 3 minutes are up and before the sand goes all the way down, you get to pick a sticker. If you don't clean up, then you don't get a sticker, and that's okay. Another consequence might be that you don't get to play with those toys next time if you don't put them away. Rarely does this not work. Now, the other part that goes along with this is that I'm always willing to help. If I was playing with the toys with them, I'm willing to help them clean up. But I always give them the choice because they may want to just do it on their own. To say, hey, would you like some help? Or do you want to handle this on your own? And again, kids have fun with it and they earn their sticker. Making it a challenge, that when you're making it a challenge, that's one of the things that timers do, makes it a competition even. It increases kids' motivation. Sock toss. Kids don't want to put their socks in the hamper, but if you put a little big basket there, maybe even a little basketball hoop, and you have to throw them into the hoop to get them into the basket, you're making it fun. You're doing something active. If you're putting music on when you're cleaning the house, if you're doing it together, maybe dancing while you're vacuuming, anything to make it more fun, you're going to get more cooperation. Let's see. Teaching values, not just rules. Let me give you a good example of that, or a better example. If you ask a child, okay, why is lying wrong? And their answer is, because I'll get in trouble. That's not a good answer because it doesn't really explain why. So if you say, well, if you lie to me all the time, how do you think I feel when you lie? Okay, yeah, I feel sad, I feel mad. Okay, do you think I would trust you as much, or do you think I would trust you less if you lie all the time? Okay, so I say, well, how would you feel, for example, if I said to you, hey, we're going to King's Dominion today, everybody get ready. And then everybody's ready and it's about to go out the door. And I said, oh, I lied. I have work to do today. I want to go work in the yard. So no, we're not going to go today. Maybe tomorrow. You're going to get a lot of anger, right? So that helps them understand and empathize with the other person's point of view. So again, it's not just about the rules of getting things done. It's about the values behind it. Same with stealing. Why is stealing wrong? It's not because you'll get in trouble or go to hell or anything like that. That's not really very meaningful. When you steal from other people, you hurt them. Then they can't trust you, and they're not going to want to be your friend or play with you if they think that you're going to steal from them. So things are wrong usually because they hurt somebody else. Right. Try extinction to reduce minor misbehavior. Sometimes parents, I've had parents in my office and you have a 3-year-old or 4-year-old and they're fidgeting, they'll say, stop fidgeting. Fidgeting is it's not wrong. It's especially if somebody with ADHD, I know that they have a hard time sitting still. So sometimes you just don't want to reinforce that. Even a little bit of yelling back and forth at home with siblings and whatnot. Maybe they sneak an extra cookie. Um, just make sure that so sometimes you just want to ignore the minor misbehavior because sometimes it'll just extinguish because it's not being reinforced. I think that's all I want to say about that one. Because here's a better example. If every time your child yells, you do something they want you to do, then you are rewarding that behavior. By extinction means that you don't reward the behavior. And then what happens eventually, if you don't get a reward for every time you do it, it's eventually going to fade out. Let me give you another example of how this actually can be fun. If the behaviors are not being polite to you, and you look at them and you just say nothing while they're talking, and they know you're waiting for them to say please, you're going to increase that behavior of please because you're not rewarding them for not asking you politely. Saying yes when you mean no, that's a really big one. And what we mean by this is that if you just say no, you can't go out and play, you didn't do your homework. Hear the tone in that, as opposed to saying, sure, you can go outside as soon as your homework gets done. Yes, you can go outside. Much better. You're going to get a much more positive reaction. So again, you're saying yes when you mean no. As soon as this gets done, absolutely you can do this. And you're staying positive and you're instilling some hope in your kids. Try the love and logic energy drain technique. What that is that your child wears you out by complaining or fussing too much. You can say, honey, I'm just too tired to talk to you about this right now. I need to take a nap, and you may go out, lie on the couch or whatever. So you say, all this complaining really wore me out. And maybe your child is giving you a hard time about that or doesn't want you to react that way. And you say, I'm too tired to take you out to the store to spend some of your allowance money. But, if you do an extra chore for me that I was not wanting to do all by myself, yeah, maybe I'll get the energy to do it later. So it could even mean if your child is misbehaving for a longer period of time and they're expecting you to take them someplace on Friday evening, and an hour beforehand, you just get on the couch and say, I've been thinking about it. I've been listening to you complain all week, and I just don't have the energy to take you to your friend's house tonight. So can you please call them and tell them that we're going to have to cancel? That's not fair, blah, 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 blah. I know, but I'm just not feeling it today. I just don't really feel like driving you. But if you'd be willing to maybe vacuum in the upstairs for me and put away the dishes and clean your room like I asked you to do earlier, I might be able to get that energy back. But you decide. It's up to you. It's a different way of responding to that. But again, you get more cooperation when you say I'm too tired, the energy drain. Because what you're doing is you're not doing it in a negative, hurtful way. You're actually telling them something that is true. Because I'm sure your energy is drained if you're having to repeatedly ask your kids to do things and they don't do them. So delayed consequences can be helpful. You probably heard parenting books and whatnot or online saying, well, you want an immediate consequence. Well, that's not always possible. Certainly with the younger kids, a more immediate consequence makes sense. If they're banging on something they're not allowed to bang, you take the item that they have. But for the older kids as well, by having a delayed consequence, you actually build their anxiety a little bit. So, for example, you can walk into your child's room and they're with a Game Boy or Nintendo Switch, whatever it might be that they're playing, that they didn't have permission to do. And maybe you took it from them and they snuck it and you see them doing that. Instead of yelling, you could say, oh no, wow, you went against my wishes and you got your Game Boy back. Something really sad is going to happen to you soon. But try not to worry about it. And then you walk out. They're going to wonder, okay, what's going to happen? Well, I'll let you know when I decide, but it's not going to be pleasant. That lets them think about it a little bit more, and then it may be a couple days later the consequence comes. And the advantage of that is it's okay to wait a little bit. The goal of waiting a little bit, especially the older kids, is they're never quite sure what you're going to do, and their anxiety is going to go up. And that they may think about it the next time they try to do that. Family meetings are great for team building. There's some handouts on family meetings. Actually, you just Google it. The nice thing about a family meeting is that it really sets the stage for communication. And if you have it maybe once a week, it only takes maybe 15, 20 minutes. And if people have issues during the week, they could write them down maybe, put them in a little box, and those are the issues you'll address at the meeting. You can have kids take turns hosting the meeting or running the meeting. meeting, usually you want to say something positive first. Okay, name something that each person in this room did this week that you thought was helpful, that you noticed. So it gives you a chance to start positive. Okay, is there some, let's look at the list of things people brought to the table. Okay, all right, so Joey took your things without permission, is that right? Okay, so talk to us about that, what happened? And then help them come up with a solution. Uh, then once that happens and everybody's had their say, you could end with, you could be a family chant, a song, it could be a snack. Maybe everybody gets ice cream after the family meeting, so that again it becomes an avenue for everybody to be able to speak their mind. And it's also very respectful. It shows respect for the kids, knowing that they're involved, that you're trying to deal with this together as a family. Using humor when possible. Sorry about that. If you use humor when you're trying to address a situation, for some kids, it tends to de-escalate a little bit. Even if you're to say something like, your child told you something that you don't believe it's going to happen, and you look, do I have stupid written all over my face? So you're telling me that the cookies jumped from the counter onto the floor and you just had to eat them, and nothing else happened in between? It's less confrontational. It doesn't mean that you don't give a consequence necessarily, but what it means is that if you're using humor like that, you might actually get a confession. Okay, mom, I did it. Thank you for admitting that. You had me going there for a while. Singing your requests, especially if you're a bad singer, if you're singing what you want, if you're singing a request, it doesn't have the same tone as what you would have if you're like yelling at your kids to do something. So if you sing it, you might get better cooperation, especially with the younger ones. If your singing is really bad, you could sing off key until they do what you're asking them to do as well. You could use it either way. Offer to help. Do you need help or can you handle this yourself? You've heard me say that earlier today. And that's a big one. Don't be so quick to jump to help. You want them to learn how to overcome the obstacles as much as they can on their own. All right. I think that's about it. Obviously, parenting is very challenging. The 21st century parenting is, I think, much more challenging because of all the things we have to do and all the access that kids have to the outside world. Scares a lot of us. But we do have methods with parenting that make it easier and more effective. We know a lot more now about parenting than we did 50 years ago, for example. Some of the things are similar, but some are different. Remember, it's a learning process for you. You'll make mistakes. It's okay when you make mistakes. As long as you apologize to your kids for making mistakes, that attachment will remain because you also want them to be able to apologize in their relationships later on in life, right? So imagine them being adults and never being able to apologize to their kids or their spouse when they did something wrong. That's not good. That's not going to bode well for that relationship. So it's okay to make mistakes as long as you show sorrow. Kids are very forgiving. And likewise, you have to forgive your kids when they make a mistake or did something bad and they are sorry for it. And to say, yeah, and it doesn't mean that everything's forgiven. For example, if your child apologizes to you, it doesn't require you to forgive them immediately. You can say, honey, I'm too mad at you right now to hear that. I appreciate you doing that, but I need some time to calm down and just get over it. And your child may be upset about that, but that's okay. The reality is you're going to have more trouble getting over it sometimes. It's okay to say that. Kids are learning too. So again, give them a break. They're going to mess up. That's normal. It's how you address and how you manage the messing up that makes a huge difference in the relationship you have with your child and how they're going to turn out as they grow up. Be careful not to damage your relationship with your child, as you and they will pay for it when problems develop later. Let me just say something here that I neglected to say earlier. If you are damaging your relationship with your child by yelling, screaming, not being forgiven, or overreacting to things that they do, when they become teenagers and they're thinking about drugs, alcohol, sneaking out, driving without permission, stuff like that, they're more likely to not come to you and not own it. Their goal will be to avoid getting caught. And so you want them to be able to, for example, say they started smoking marijuana and they wanted to tell you they're not so sure about it, but they're afraid of the consequence. And they come to you and say, okay, mom, I've been getting high for the last few weeks. And you come down on them and punish them, they're less likely to come to you later. And I think that's one of the hardest things in terms of parenting, especially teenagers. You can't stop them from what they're doing. You've got to acknowledge that it was hard for them to tell you, that you're glad that they were honest with you. There are certain things that you're going to have to do in reaction to that, but you can't just punish them completely and ground them from everything every time they tell you the truth on something like that. So But when you have a strong relationship, they can come with you. You can help them deal with it. You can help them with their decision making. That way, they consult with you. You still may have consequences, like I said, with the driving and getting high. You've got to be careful, and safety always comes first. But when you keep that relationship strong, and as long as your child still has a wish for your love and wanting to please you, want them to be proud of you, your motivation for doing the right thing improves. So here's some resources for you. I mentioned here loveandlogic.com. You've got some of the books that I referenced earlier in the talk. We do have a parenting webpage on our website, so please feel free to check that out as well. Podcasts can also be a great way to learn some parenting strategies. I just listed a couple of podcasts here that you might want to look at. If you go to my website, jamesjchris.com, down here, you can access some other talks that I've given. You can look at some of the self-help books that I've written. I've written 8 self-help books for kids now and teens on how to deal with certain things. My latest book titled What's the Big Deal About Addictions? And that's for teenagers with addictions of all sorts. So thank you very much. If you have questions, obviously we didn't get to answer them in this format, but you've got my email address there. Feel free to reach out. And thank you very much.